The Platypus. The promise of post-Earth utopia in the off-world colonies was all but a distant dream, a faded imprint barely recognizable even in the minds of those with decent recall. As memories from Earth faintly disappeared in what seemed like lifetimes ago, through the wake of all the chaos that has since ensued, the colonies were weak. Mankind had been on a continual downward trajectory since vacating their beloved home planet. Normalcy, along with peace, hope, prosperity, were all but a daydream. Relics of Earth culture that had once been taken for granted. Colonial man suffered great loss of life during the Arcadian Spring uprising, as well as mass destruction from the rogue cryoborgs, pre-descendant. With no comforts, no routine, almost no purpose and no prospects, the colonies were dire, which is one reason the impending extinction of man's best friend was enough to send the colonies reeling. Nobody anticipated the human dependency and loneliness felt once the bond between man and dog had been severed, equal in pain to losing a friend or family member, which most colonists had experienced too much of already. The thought of never having a furry companion ever again sent even the most optimistic of individuals into despair and grief. People were taking their own lives, Romeo and Juliet style, except instead of lovers, it was dogs and their owners. This was just one more thing to add to a whole laundry list of things that had just made colonial life unbearable. Though they had some time to prepare for the inevitable, once they knew that they must vacate Earth, never in a million years did they realize the importance of keeping man's best friend healthy. There were obvious things to take care of course, and figure out, most directly linked to survival. But this? No. Not even the cleverest of the bunch saw it coming. That's right. The future and happiness of the human species is now directly dependent on the health of its dogs. While space affects man's health and age in some ways, bone density loss, loss in eyesight, strain on the heart, etc., the colonies found ways to counteract those effects, normalizing the aging process while neutralizing the anti-gravity effects. However, our furry companions weren't so lucky. Even on Earth, it was believed that dogs aged 7 times faster than their human counterparts. But in outer space, dogs were dropping off daily. Nothing, it would seem, could be done fast enough to help prolong and secure the continuance of the species, and inevitably, human life. Fresh from her success on her previous mission, tracking down the descendant, the elite Order of the Star Syndicate, EOS, has Ana-Tole practically on speed dial. A dismal reality for her, it's nothing she cares to broadcast. She's never been a company man. Though pleased with her own karmic points for all her successful EOS missions, she can't stand the thought of being chummy with the Space Force. They're practically the governing body of the multiverse, and she being a smuggler by trade, well, it's just not a good look. Let it ring, Ana-Tole commands, as the lights on her comlink light up the cockpit with bright enthusiasm. Her crew rolls their eyes as she pretends to be busy pressing buttons on the control pad. But we haven't had any excitement since you brought you-know-who back to the colonies, Little Grey exclaims. I'm starting to get a bit, bored. Little Grey is one of the quintessential little green men that rose to notoriety after the radar crash at Roswell in 1947, Earth time. A little less vibrant, a little less green than generally believed, these types of aliens are actually completely grey in appearance. On a side note, his actual name is a long combination of vowel sounds that even he struggles to pronounce most of the time. So to his current crew, he's known simply as Little Grey. Little Grey lived a life of adventure, always on the move, always with targets to acquire. He worked planet Earth while it was still heavily populated with humans. The Greys are a benevolent race. Everyone in the multiverse knows that, or at least they know that now. Their presence on Earth was one of research and study. They were there to help evolve the human race and wished them no ill will. Somewhere in the mix, however, this was lost on humans, as were most things, who, underneath the row, otherwise known as reptarians or reptilians of Earth, hypnosis, They couldn't see past the veil to understand the blessings of the grey presence on the planet, generally becoming unreasonably frightened of them. After years of doing meaningful work for the plight of helping human existence, Little Grey grew tired of his appearances being met with blood-curdling, deafening screams. Even though he didn't have ears, so that wasn't exactly the issue, but while continually being misunderstood by the humans, he got tired. One day he decided to quit, and left his regular grey life behind. Feeling a little down in the dumps and pretty low on life, he meandered his way around the galaxies, until eventually stumbling into Ana-Tole and her motley crew at Otto's, the regular favourite bar of smugglers and wanderers across the galaxies. Feeling he could do with a change of scenery, and after sharing some hilarious human abduction stories over a few too many galaxy dust cocktails, Ana-Tole invited him to join them, giving Little Grey a much-needed sense of freedom and independence, adventure, and a new lease on life. Though a complete opposite of most of the characters on board Pluto, Ana-Tole's ship, Little Grey fit in well with the crew and turned out to be a great balance between the different attitudes on board. Ana-Tole, rooting for Little Grey to come out of his shell a bit, could see his heart was in the right place, although he didn't actually have a physical heart, and could definitely appreciate his people-pleasing mentality. Such a pleasant change from everyone else who always seemed to challenge her every decision. Bored? Seriously? Of all the people in all the worlds, in all the galaxies, Little Grey, you're breaking my heart right now, moaned Ana-Tole, as this was the first time he had spoken up against her. I let you join us? We're just chilling, having a great time up here, and then you tell me you're bored? Mantis, a reptilian and ant-man crossbreed outcast of 7 feet tall. He resembles something of a praying mantis but with scaly snake-like skin. He's a bit ornery sometimes and isn't afraid to show it. His mixed heritage often confuses his feelings, as he's still coming to terms with the acceptance that he comes from the same evil reptilian breed, Ro, that held planet Earth and humans captive for millennia. He can't help but feel guilty for the inevitable downfall of the human race. To the embarrassment of the rest of the crew, he's always uncomfortable around humans and tries to overcompensate with exaggerated kindness, which always comes across poorly, scaring most of them away. Ana-Tole sees through all of his problems, however, and understands that most of the time he really does mean well, though sometimes it's deep, 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 deep down. So Mantis shot Little Grey a look with all sets of his eyes. Mantis could hear the sarcasm in Ana-Tole's voice as she started to give Little Grey a hard time, and decided to chime in on the fun. I've been called a lot of things in my life, Little Grey. An evil bastard, a shit-smelling snaky bug thing, a squabbly Otis, a manky lort-mingy thingy, and a mind-flaying reptarian, but none hurt so much as you calling me a bore. If Little Grey could blush, his cheeks would be bright red. Though sarcasm was completely lost on him, as it was on the rest of the crew too, he couldn't stand the attention his offhand comment had created. He hates to be at the center of attention. With no ability to detect or understand sarcasm in either, both the reset Newton Cryoborg 2.0 and the AI on board Pluto decided to step in and protect Little Grey. Mantis found the lack of humour infuriating, which incited a yelling match between everyone, much to the irritation of Ana-Tole, forcing her to eventually decide to pick up the comlink she had been avoiding in the first place. Pluto 2533, pilot Ana-Tole here. Ana-Tole deliberately yelled into the comm to force everyone else to shut up. Ana-Tole, this is Captain Maddox, a commanding voice toned over the device. EOS has a rather urgent request that we need the assistance of you and your crew. Can you please report to HQ immediately? In the background, Little Grey made eyes with Newton 2.0 and pumped his fist with excitement, letting out a rather loud and eager, yes! Without skipping a beat or letting Ana-Tole get a word in edgeways, Maddox took Little Grey's response as an affirmative and replied, right then, see you soon, before quickly disengaging the call. Ana-Tole glared at Little Grey, this time without any warmth or sarcasm, and silently readied the craft for the light-speed flight to EOS headquarters a few solar systems away. After a short reunion, where Ana-Tole congratulated her old friend Maddox on her promotion to captain, the crew were briefed on the dire colonial situation. Still peeved from the earlier row, Ana-Tole and Mantis couldn't resist their wisecracks. It was as if they were putting on a show, to the dismay of the EOS officers and their humorless crewmates, thinking it a little jovial that the survival of humanity literally depends on canines. "Great mother of Pleiades, you guys need to lighten up," Ana-Tole exclaimed with that tone in her voice, somewhere between slightly annoyed and disappointed, while Mantis rolled all his eyes. "Okay, Commander, so let me get this straight. You need us to go to the Pleiadian Planet Lab, ask someone to alter Canis lupus familiaris's DNA to make sure they evolve to survive in outer space, then have them beam that DNA back in time to the earliest dogs on planet Earth so that they will one day evolve properly to survive colonial life in this day and age?" Commander Shira nods. Nobody knew what species or race of alien Shira was, or even how old they are. Just like their rank at EOS, they commanded complete respect. Ana-Tole wasn't sure if Shira was male or female, not that it mattered, and everything about Shira was shrouded in this deep, mysterious, ancient, calm aura of the highest good. Just like the members of the Council of Grandmothers, the absolute highest authority in the multiverse that oversees EOS, Shira has a sense of understanding and compassion that many other military leaders lack. Though Shira and Ana-Tole haven't had the easiest relationship through both the Arcadian Spring and the Descendant missions, in addition to Ana-Tole's complete disregard for authority, their time and work together has allowed them to develop a mutual, deep, and profound respect for each other. "Interesting," Ana-Tole quipped, a little unsure. Several uncomfortable and silent moments pass with a series of looks and glances making their way around the room. Maddox to Ana-Tole, Ana-Tole to crew, Shira to Ana-Tole, Ana-Tole to Shira. Everyone letting the news they had just heard sink in while wondering what would come out of Ana-Tole's mouth next. More silence followed while the tension in the air grew. It was almost a power play between Ana-Tole and Shira. Who would crack first? "You can do that?" Ana-Tole burst out in surprise. "EOS has the power to go back in time and alter canine evolution? Then why didn't you go back and stop the Row from holding humans hostage on Earth all that time?" Ana-Tole became enraged as the thought began to sink in more. How could they? The one organization that rules and protects the multiverse. They have the ability to pretty much go back and fix anything that's ever gone wrong, and they've done nothing. How could they just casually let go of something as serious as planetary imprisonment? Her disdain was obvious. The look on her face said everything, so she didn't have to. Taking a moment to evaluate her options, and knowing there must be some really deep and complicated reasons for EOS's non-interference on planet Earth, while trying to avoid the can of worms that whole discussion would bring, Ana-Tole jumped straight back into the details of their mission while trying to end the conversation, feeling a sudden urge to leave HQ hastily as if it was on fire. On the way to the Pleiadian Planet Lab, the atmosphere in Bluto was so thick it almost caused the cockpit windows to fog. The crew sat silently as the initial excitement from the prospect of a new mission had worn off. Everyone sat contemplating the thought that human life on planet Earth could have been sustained if EOS had just stepped in. Little Grey always wanted what was best for humans. Mantis wouldn't have to deal with all his inherent shame, and Ana-Tole, well, she's human after all, so perhaps she hurt the most. After perhaps one of the quietest trips the crew had ever endured, they arrive and dock the ship at the Pleiadian Planet Lab. The most uninspiring space hub you can imagine, depressingly reminiscent of bad architecture from the 1980s. "I'm a huge fan of the Pleiadians," Little Grey perked up, eager to lighten the mood. "Huge, huh?" Ana-Tole responded with a smirk on her face, pleased and relieved that it was Little Grey who was the one trying to cheer everyone up. She was well aware that Mantis had a tendency to make things even more awkward when he tried too hard, and the AI in Cryoborg didn't stand a chance at being empathetic. "Okay," Ana-Tole announced. "Little Grey and I will go in and deal with the lab. Everyone else needs to stay on board Bluto and check her maintenance and fuel logs. I want her ready to go by the time we're done. We're going to head somewhere EOS can't find us." Little Grey was happy to be an integral part of the mission, while the others had plenty of work to keep them occupied in the meantime. As the pair walked down the clinical halls of the lab building, seeing door after door labeled with different planets, stars, galaxies, and solar systems. They eventually made it to a door with a sign that read, Pleiadian Planet Lab number 1003-567, Earth. As they approached, the door beeped and slid open, revealing a large hall divided into sections, filled with computer stations and microscopes that neither Little Grey or Ana-Tole had ever seen before. They were greeted immediately by a Pleiadian lab technician, who ushered them over to a designated fourth cataclysm area. The lab tech, LT9, was a slender and tall-built young Pleiadian from the Mizar zone of about 400 years or so, young in his eyes and fairly new to the lab, meaning he was quite excited to work this mission with his new guests. Both Little Grey and Ana-Tole, with very personal connections to Earth and its history, looked fascinated by what lay before them. Wow! Dogs didn't exist until after the fourth cataclysm? Fascinating! Little Grey spoke aloud, but to himself. Guess not, Ana-Tole responded, turning to LT9, who was setting up a computer station nearby. So, how long is this going to take, do you think, LT? Well, it's a process, so I'd get comfortable if I were you. We'll be working on this for a while. A while? Ana-Tole quizzed him back. How long is a while? Can't you be more specific? This is a very detailed and fragile task, so no, I don't know how long this will be. It will happen when it happens. What kind of response is that? It will happen when it happens, she mocks. Only the human race's existence is on the line. LT9 lets out a giant sigh and shoots her a frustrated look. Never mind, I don't want to hear it, Ana-Tole tries to backtrack. Do you mind if we take a look around? LT9 quickly nods, knowing he'd get his job done way easier without Little Grey and Ana-Tole staring him down. Yes, please. Just try not to touch anything. I'll find you when I've tracked down the particular strain of DNA that needs alteration. They wander off and find a series of appealing-looking joysticks, pen pads, computer screens, and buttons in a part of the lab called Creature Creation. Ooh, what do we have here? Ana-Tole queried with intrigue. It looks like an art project of some sort. On the screens in front of them shone images of animals they'd never seen before. They were similar to actual Earth creatures, but slightly different somehow. Pictures of tie-dye-looking zebras with neon pink and yellow markings, and cows covered in tight curls reflected in Little Grey's dark, black almond-shaped eyes, as more animals appeared and disappeared on the screen. I've never seen anything like it, Grey chimed in. It's magnificent! Yeah, what planet are those guys on? I want to go, Ana-Tole agreed. Creations that never came to pass, LT9 suddenly spoke up, startling both Little Grey and Ana-Tole as they stood mesmerized by the brightly colored exotic animals. It was deemed that these species lacked the appropriate survival mechanisms needed to survive life on Earth, so they were never shipped. Huh? Ana-Tole grunted in both bewilderment and slight disappointment. She suddenly snapped out of her dazed trance and asked, So you're done then? That was quick. LT9 shook his head and answered, I haven't started yet. I had to gather some research and let you know what I have to do so you can report it back to EOS. He stands there as if waiting for an answer from either of them until it's Ana-Tole's turn to let out a loud breath and rolls her eyes. You said you need to let us know what you're going to do, Ana-Tole repeated back to him in a nagging tone, getting a little impatient with all the awkward silences she had been confronted with that day. Come on, we don't have all day. Right, okay, LT9 jumped in assuredly. I need to first isolate the issue in a current strand of canine DNA. Then I'll send the reprogrammed DNA back in time to the last cataclysm, so that it has time to evolve properly and not become a problem in post-Earth colonial life. I have no room for error. It has to be incredibly accurate, so that it doesn't end up changing the evolution of the species or affect the humans' choice in taking dogs to the colonies. Sweet. That doesn't sound too bad, right, Grey? Ana-Tole tries to be optimistic. Nothing much writing on that. Easy peasy. LT9 squinted and gave side-eye toward Ana-Tole before turning to walk away. Can you call us over when you do the time-travel-y bit? I really want to see that in action, Ana-Tole yelled over to him as he left them, completely ignoring her last comment. Rude, Ana-Tole spat out under her breath. What does this do? Little Grey asked curiously as he pulled his 4 little spindly fingers down on a lever. The whole computer came to life, as if it had been sleeping for a number of years. Lights blinked in sequence, getting quicker each round. Air whirred around the sound of busy mechanics, and the screens reset, blank, as if they were ready to welcome a new assignment. As everything roared up, Little Grey continued pushing random buttons and twisting and turning knobs until suddenly a strange-looking creature appeared on each display unit. "Great mother of Pleiades!" Ana-Tole muttered in bewilderment. "That's the ugliest-looking thing I've ever laid eyes on. He's worse than Otto." Both she and Little Grey amused themselves while comparing this creature to the bar owner, whose establishment they frequented often. As both moved in to get a closer view on the display, they analyzed the creature. It was around 28 feet tall, furry, with long limbs and a heavy-set body with a crown adorned on top. "I'm so confused. What is that supposed to be, and why is it wearing a crown?" Little Grey asked innocently. "That thing could take out entire cities on Earth and eat people if they really considered putting it there. Gross!" Ana-Tole exclaimed as she shook her head and got shivers down her spine. "Oh, look," Little Grey interrupted as he pointed out that he had found the right buttons to alter the design of the monstrous creature. Meanwhile, on the other side of the lab, LT9 was busy solving the canine issue, isolating individual strands of DNA, programming it to clone the new version into all subsequent breeds, his head glued to his microscope as a large entourage of various beings barged into the lab loudly, startling him, almost causing him to bungle his delicate work. LT9 didn't need to turn around to know that one of the unannounced guests was the lab's biggest private investor, the great Platypus of Canopus, a very rich and very large alien. Richer than several species combined, the GP, as he was known, owned half of the Milky Way. Across the lab, both Little Grey and Ana-Tole, completely unaware of the entrance of the new guests, were engulfed with redesigning their beast. Back and forth, they took turns adding colors, limbs, features, and traits on the screen. "Try tie-dye," Grey exclaimed, excited with this little side task, as Ana-Tole played around with different types of skins and furs. "I'm not into it. It's too hippie," Ana-Tole replied as she assessed the mock-up on the screen. They continued for a while until Ana-Tole proudly presented their finished creature as she hit the button labeled Launch. "Et voilà!" she exclaimed in a quasi-French accent. The animal popped up on all the screens at the surrounding workstations. They had not only scaled this monstrous beast down, but also made him somewhat cute-looking. He had a beak like a duck, webbed feet, a furry coat, and a tail like a beaver, not to mention that he can also lay eggs, swim, and is poisonous. "Cool!" Little Grey chimed in. "This is so much better. I like him." Unbeknownst to both of them, the launch button wasn't merely a preview your creation type finish button. This type of preview button actually did exist. However, it was too small for either Ana-Tole or Little Grey to actually notice. Nope. Instead, the launch button was the "there's no turning back, your animal is being allocated on the next delivery to Earth immediately" type button, which inevitably, because of LT9's progress, their creature had made its way instantly to the dawn of Earth's final era, the beginning of the world humankind was most familiar with before they left for the colonies. Standing there rather pleased with themselves, Ana-Tole caught the eye of LT9 as he popped his head up across the room and beckoned them both over to his station again. "Mission complete. You can tell EOS I just uploaded and reintroduced the new DNA back in the evolutionary chain on Earth. According to my calculations, that should take care of everything," LT9 explained. "Awesome, good timing," Ana-Tole responded. "I'm so hungry, it's about that time." As both Little Grey and Ana-Tole thanked LT9 for his work and turned to leave, LT9's supervisor, Deneb, came running up, flustered while projecting angry undertones. "Hold it right there," Deneb yelled at the duo as they started toward the exit. Ana-Tole and Little Grey stopped dead in their tracks and shot each other a look, slightly confused as to what could possibly be the issue. They turned around slowly to see a much older-looking scientist in a lab coat. He was humanoid with human-like skin, but covered in long, silvery hair from shoulders to toe. His head was as bald as a human baby's butt. No eyebrows, no lashes, no whiskers. But it's hard to tell whether it's for the laboratory reasons or it's just the way he is. Either way, his silky hair visibly stood on end as the tone of his voice indicated his irritation. You just introduced a made-up animal into Earth's ecosystem without any testing or research, he yelled at Ana-Tole. Don't blame me, Ana-Tole fired back. LT9 just messed with it. I didn't go near it. LT9? Deneb glared at LT9 while desperately losing control of his rage, gritting his teeth. LT9 immediately felt threatened and began relaying the entire scenario in a tizzy, all the way from Eos's initial comm message to Ana-Tole's arrival. He spoke so fast, loud, and high-pitched that he was out of breath and was on the verge of fainting at the prospect of having done something wrong. As he spoke, his words kept getting higher and quicker, while at any moment sounding like his voice box might just crack into a million pieces. During LT9's frantic story recapping the day's events, the GP and his entourage had joined the audience, making the scene much more uncomfortable with dozens more weird looks and facial expressions from the onlookers. Once LT9 caught his breath and calmed down to a place where his words started making sense again, he ended his story. I triple-checked everything before I changed the delivery, then looked through the time progression to check the canine evolution. There's no way it wasn't successful. Canine? This booming, deep voice suddenly filled the room questioningly. It was a voice that could just make you hold your breath without realizing it. Ana-Tole stood holding her breath while Little Gray's shriveled his head shrank down, decreasing his height by a few feet as the great platypus of Canopus took over the conversation. You're not talking about the dog problem at the colonies? LT9 asked him, this time with a steady voice at a regular volume. Well, for him, while a wave of relief came over him. Dogs? Filthy animals, the GP proclaimed. No, of course we're not interested in dogs. A sudden silence descended the group gathered in the lab. One more awkward silence to add to Ana-Tole's basket that day, as if she were randomly collecting them for some reason. No stranger to awkwardness, Ana-Tole usually basked in these moments, except this one actually frightened her. LT9 and Little Grey stood silently and confused as all eyes in the room glared at them. Multicolored, foul-smelling sweat began pouring down their foreheads as they could feel the heat from the tension. You could almost see the wheels turning in Ana-Tole's head as she stood there with a semi-vacant expression on her face, until it suddenly dawned on her. Oh! Ana-Tole made a noise, trying to be casual and cool, as she finally put all of the pieces of the puzzle together. Yeah, that's it. That's what you're upset about, she said, as she pressed her fingers together, thinking up a plan while knowing that her and Little Grey's exit might suddenly get a little bit sticky. It suddenly occurred to LT9 what was going on too, as he walked over and switched sides. Standing next to Deneb, he yelled at them both. I told you not to touch anything! You made a mockery of me, the GP interrupted with a harsh tone. His anger seeped through his words as he tried to restrain himself. He broke loose from his self-restraint as he let go and went on a rampage, projecting his roaring voice over the heads of the onlookers. I paid the Platypus top dollar to support this lab, purchase of all this equipment, figure out time manipulation. In return, I was promised the most exotic and most powerful creature ever to be worshipped on Earth. It was to be designed and named after me. Me, the great platypus. A few moments passed, and you could have heard a needle drop 2 labs away. The silence was more deafening than the GP's voice. I stopped by today as a formality, passing through to see how my namesake was regarded throughout Earth history. Between his phrases, Ana-Tole had trouble focusing. All other sound in the room disappeared as if there were a single high-pitched tone sustaining and resonating in her brain. As she looked down at the floor, she could hear her pulse thundering in her ear as the GP continued his rampage. Ana-Tole had been in a lot of trouble in her life, but now wondered if she'd be making it out of this one at all. The GP continued his rant. I arrived today to find this meek, semi-aquatic, venomous creature with Frankenstein features and webbed feet. This animal is not worshipped. It's a freak. freak, Ana-Tole retorted without any thought, as everyone looked at her in disbelief. Not only to talk back to the GP, but to disagree with him? Well, no one's brave or stupid enough to do that. No one, except Ana-Tole, of course. As this scenario played out, Ana-Tole and the GP stood there bickering for another hour or so, continuing to defend design choices for the creature one by one. Ana-Tole used Little Grey for backup, as they both were able to twist the heated discussion into more of an explanation of why the GP should actually be proud of his new creature, and why it's best not to make animals that humans on Earth are scared of. Take it from me, Ana-Tole explained. I am a dumb human, and I am the absolute authority on this in this room. And I know, without a doubt, that while early humans might worship such creatures out of fear, they would eventually evolve to kill them and endanger them, as humankind does to everything it touches. Trust me. Her ending words carried a weight as if she was delivering a speech for some political rally. A few members of the entourage applauded, before being silenced by their fellow companions' looks. It seemed, as pissed as he was, the GP eventually became tired of arguing, something he wasn't used to, and finally came around to accepting Ana-Tole's viewpoint. Deneb 3D printed a version of the new animal in the lab on site, which instantly took affection to its namesake, cuddling each other as they left. "Watch the spurs," Little Grey warned them excitedly as the entourage filed out of the lab. "They're poisonous." Once everyone was gone, the energy in the room completely lifted as the sound of beeps and blurps from the computer stations became audible once again. Deneb and LT9 bid their visitors farewell and clocked out for the night, heading back to their Pleiadian hub, while Little Grey and Ana-Tole walked slowly down the hallway of Planet Labs back to Pluto, where they couldn't wait to share their pride as the creators of the infamous Platypus on planet Earth, with Mantis and the rest of their crew.